this video, we're going to unpack one of the most important parts of healthcare, the technology and equipment that sit behind almost every diagnosis, operation, and hospital visit. When we talk about healthcare technology and equipment, or medical devices, we're talking about the tools of modern medicine. Think of MRI scanners and CT machines. Think of surgical robots and heart stents. Think of IV pumps, dental implants, lab instruments, and drug delivery components. These companies usually don't discover new drugs. Instead, they make the hardware, software, and consumables that doctors, nurses, dentists, and labs use every day to diagnose, monitor, and treat patients. The scale of this is big. Globally, the medical devices market is around $540 to $550 billion in 2024, and it's projected to reach roughly $880 to $900 billion by 2032. That implies an annual growth rate of about 5.5 to 6.5% over the next decade. In the United States, the market is roughly $190 billion in 2024 and is expected to grow to somewhere between $315 and $345 billion by the early to mid-2030s, roughly 6 to 7% per year. Europe is around 130 to 150 billion euros, about $140 billion, with growth in the mid-single digits. Asia-Pacific and other emerging markets already account for more than 30% of global MedTech demand, and they're growing faster, usually in the high single to low double-digit range, especially in China, India, and Southeast Asia. For investors, this sector is economically important and sits somewhere between defensive healthcare and growth technology. People still need surgery, diagnostics, and hospital care even in recessions, so demand is partly defensive. At the same time, new devices and diagnostics can take share and expand procedure volumes, so it's also innovation-driven. Now that we've sketched the what and the size of the medtech world, let's talk about how these businesses actually make money and what their economics look like. Most companies fall into a few clear business models. Some sell big capital equipment, like an MRI machine, a lab analyzer, or a surgical robot, and then make recurring revenue from disposable kits, reagents, service contracts, and software licenses. Others sell implants and procedure-linked devices, such as stents, valves, orthopedic implants, pacemakers, neuromodulators, and catheters, and they get paid every time a procedure happens. Diagnostic labs and test developers get paid per test. Blood tests, molecular tests, imaging reads, and focus on volume, contracts with hospitals and insurers, and how clinically useful their tests are. Life science tools and bioprocessing suppliers sell research instruments, reagents, and bioprocess systems to pharma, biotech, and academic labs, again, with heavy recurring consumables. Hospital supply and monitoring companies earn from IV sets, syringes, wound care, and monitoring devices, which are everyday necessities. And the distribution and pharmacy channels are the big wholesalers and retail or practice-focused distributors that move drugs, devices, and supplies through the system, usually on very thin margins, but enormous volumes. Profitability is attractive for many manufacturers. Large medtech companies often have gross margins around 55 to 70%, and operating margins around 15 to 25% for mature leaders. A typical device manufacturer might spend 30 to 45% of revenue on cost of goods sold, 25 to 35% on sales, marketing, and distribution, 7 to 12% on research and development, and 5 to 10% on general and administrative costs. By contrast, wholesalers and distributors usually run on just 1 to 3% operating margins, with cost of goods sold above 95% of revenue. They win through scale and working capital efficiency, not big markups. Looking at growth, global medtech overall is expected to grow around 5 to 7% per year over the next 3 to 5 years, helped by aging populations, more chronic disease, catch-up investment in hospitals and diagnostics after COVID, and ongoing upgrades like robotics, minimally invasive surgery, AI imaging, and remote monitoring. Over a 5 to 10-year view, growth is likely similar or slightly higher, around 5 to 8%, with faster pockets in life science tools, bioprocessing, digital and remote monitoring, and robotics, and slower growth in more mature supplies. With the big picture set, let's move into the first building block, diagnostic imaging and in vitro diagnostics. This is where healthcare begins, because it's all about finding out what's going on inside the body. On the imaging side, you have companies that make MRI, CT, ultrasound, X-ray, PET, and mammography systems. On the in vitro diagnostic side, you have firms that make reagents and instruments for blood tests, chemistry and immunoassay panels, molecular tests, and point-of-care kits. You also have central labs and test developers that run diagnostic services. For example, labs that process oncology or genomic tests. Their main products include imaging systems, service contracts, and software for image management and AI-assisted reading, lab analyzers plus high-margin reagents and consumables, proprietary tests such as cancer screening and companion diagnostics, and lab testing and reporting services. In the value chain, diagnostics sit at the front end of care. They help doctors detect, stage, and monitor disease, and they are strongly linked with hospitals, clinics, and pharmaceutical companies. On the U.S. stock market, examples include GE Healthcare Technologies with ticker GEHC, Hologic with ticker HOLX, Quest Diagnostics with ticker DGX, LabCorp with ticker LH, QuidelOrtho with ticker QDEL, BioRod Laboratories with ticker BIO, Revity with ticker RVTY, Exact Sciences with ticker XS, Guardant Health with ticker GH, and Natera with ticker NTRA. Financially, they make money through capital sales of big imaging machines and lab analyzers, recurring high-margin consumables such as reagents, test kits and contrast agents, service and software contracts, and per-test fees for labs and test developers. The in vitro diagnostics market is around $105 to $110 billion in 2024 and is expected to reach more than $150 billion by 2030, a mid-single to high single-digit growth rate. Diagnostic imaging equipment is roughly $50 to $55 billion in 2024, projected to reach $75 to $80 billion by the early 2030s, at about 5% per year. Combined, diagnostics and imaging are roughly a $160 billion global market today. Around $55 to $65 billion of that is in the US, about $40 to $45 billion is in Europe, and $50 to $60 billion comes from developing markets in Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East, and Africa, which are growing faster than the developed world. Margins in this block are strong. Gross margins are often 55 to 70% on reagents and tests. Large imaging manufacturers may have slightly lower margins on hardware, but higher on service and software. Operating margins are often 15 to 25% for strong franchises, though small or early-stage test developers can be loss-making. For a mature player, cost of goods is usually 30 to 40% of revenue, sales and marketing around 25 to 30%, research and development around 8 to 12%, and general and admin around 5 to 8%. Growth over the next 3 to 5 years is expected around 5 to 7% per year overall, with faster growth in molecular and genomic testing and AI-enabled imaging, and slower growth in routine tests. Over 5 to 10 years, growth could be similar or slightly higher, around 6 to 8%, if screening guidelines broaden, companion diagnostics adoption expands, and emerging markets build out labs and imaging capacity. Through economic cycles, diagnostics are moderately defensive. Cancer screening, acute diagnostics, and hospital imaging are essential. Test volumes are fairly stable, although elective screening can be delayed in a downturn, and large hospital equipment purchases like MRI or CT machines can be postponed when budgets are tight. Key drivers are healthcare spending by governments and private payers, reimbursement and coverage decisions for tests, regulatory approvals for new diagnostics, and technology shifts such as AI reading tools, and the balance between point-of-care and central labs. As a long-term investor, you want to watch reimbursement and clinical guidelines, the consumable attachment rate per installed machine, the strength of clinical evidence and differentiation, the size and stickiness of the installed base, and the regulatory and data privacy risks, especially around AI and genomics. Once a problem has been found, the next question is how to treat it. That brings us to the second building block: surgical and interventional platforms and implants. This block sits at the procedure and intervention stage, the moment when a doctor performs surgery or a minimally invasive procedure. It includes robotic and advanced surgical platforms such as multi-port and single-port robots, navigation systems, and energy devices. It also includes interventional cardiology and vascular devices like stents, balloons, atherectomy tools, and structural heart valves. On top of that, you have cardiac rhythm and neuromodulation devices, such as pacemakers, defibrillators, spinal cord stimulators, and deep brain stimulators, and orthopedic, spine and trauma implants, such as hip and knee implants, spine hardware and trauma plates and screws. Products range from capital systems like robots and navigation consoles, to single-use instruments, drapes, cassettes, and energy devices, to implants that stay in the body. Companies also provide service, training, and software to support surgeons. On U.S. exchanges, you see Intuitive Surgical with ticker ISRG, Stryker with ticker SYK, Medtronic with ticker MDT, Boston Scientific with ticker BSX, Edwards Lifesciences with ticker EW, Zimmer Biomet with ticker ZBH, Globus Medical with ticker GMED, Penumbra with ticker PEN, Shockwave Medical with ticker SWAV, and Abiomed's heart pump franchise inside Johnson & Johnson with ticker JNJ. Economically, these companies make money from implant sales directly tied to procedure volumes, from capital system sales for robots and cath lab platforms, from high-margin disposables used in each procedure, and from ongoing service and surgeon training. Surgical equipment alone is about a $20 billion market in 2024, with 8 to 9% plus expected annual growth to 2030 as minimally invasive and robotic surgery grows. Orthopedic devices are roughly a $50 to $60 billion global market, with 3 to 5% growth, driven by aging populations and obesity. Neuromodulation devices are around $5.8 to $6.6 billion in 2024 or 2025, projected to grow at about 8 to 9% per year to 2030. Surgical robots are around $15 to $16 billion in 2024 and are expected to grow to more than $60 billion by 2034, a mid-teens growth rate. Ballpark, this block is about $120 to $150 billion globally today, with maybe 40% in the US and around 25 to 30% in Europe. Margins here are strong. Gross margins are often 60 to 70% on implants and disposables, and the big robots, while lower margin themselves, help lock in high-margin instrument sales. Operating margins for well-run large-cap companies are often 20 to 30%. A typical expense mix might be 30 to 35% of revenue and cost of goods, 30 to 35% in sales and marketing, especially surgeon education and reps in the operating room, 8 to 12% in research and development, and 5 to 10% in general and admin. Over the next 3 to 5 years, this block is expected to grow around 5 to 7% per year overall, with low to mid-single-digit growth in mature orthopedic segments and high single to low double-digit growth in structural heart, neuromodulation, and robotics. Over 5 to 10 years, growth could stay around 6 to 8%, with upside if adoption of minimally invasive and robotic surgery broadens and earlier stage use of devices expands. This block is more cyclical than basic supplies, but less cyclical than many consumer sectors. Elective procedures like hip and knee replacements or elective spine surgery can be delayed in recessions or when hospital budgets are pressured, whereas life-saving and urgent procedures are more resilient. Performance is sensitive to hospital capital budgets and interest rates, reimbursement for procedures and device types, and regulatory actions such as recalls and safety alerts. For long-term investors, key questions include whether a company is simply riding overall procedure growth or taking share from rivals, the quality of clinical outcomes data, the strength of training and ecosystem lock-in around surgeons, the level of pricing pressure from tenders in Europe and China, and the company's overall regulatory and safety record. After diagnosis and surgery, patients still need to be monitored and cared for, often for days or weeks. That brings us to the third building block: hospital equipment, monitoring, and drug delivery. This block is the bedside and logistics layer of hospitals. It includes patient monitoring and respiratory care, such as bedside monitors, ventilators, and sleep apnea devices. It covers infusion and IV therapy and drug delivery, like infusion pumps, IV sets, drug delivery disposables, and primary packaging. It also covers infection prevention and medical surgical supplies, such as sterilization equipment, surgical drapes and gowns, and everyday consumables like catheters, needles, syringes, and wound care products. Core products include monitoring systems, increasingly with wireless and remote capabilities, infusion pumps plus disposable IV sets, sterilizers, washers, and disinfectants, and large volumes of single-use items. On U.S. markets, you see Baxter International with ticker BAX, Becton Dickinson with ticker BDX, ICU Medical with ticker ICUI, ResMed with ticker RMD, Masimo with ticker MASI, Steris with ticker STE, Teleflex with ticker TFX, West Pharmaceutical Services with ticker WST, and Owens & Minor with ticker OMI. These companies earn revenue from capital sales of monitors, ventilators, sterilizers, and pumps, from high-volume consumables like IV sets, disposable sensors and packaging, from service and software such as maintenance and monitoring platforms, and, in some cases, from distribution and logistics services for medical surgical products. Patient monitoring devices alone are roughly a $50 to $60 billion market in 2024 and are expected to more than double to about $120 billion by the early 2030s, implying around 10% annual growth. Medical supplies, broadly defined, are estimated at about $146 to $185 billion in 2024, with growth somewhere between 4 and 15%, depending on what's included. If you put these pieces together, this block likely sits around $200 to $250 billion or more globally today, with roughly $70 to $90 billion in the US, $50 to $65 billion in Europe, and $70 to $90 billion across developing markets. Margins vary widely. Higher tech monitoring and respiratory devices can see gross margins of 50 to 60%, while commodity supplies have much lower margins. Diversified players might have operating margins around 10 to 20%. A rough expense mix would be 40 to 55% cost of goods, higher for commodity supplies, 20 to 25% sales and marketing, 5 to 8% research and development, and 5 to 10% general and admin. Growth over the next 3 to 5 years is likely around 6 to 9% per year overall, with high growth in remote and home monitoring and steady mid-single-digit growth in traditional supplies. Over 5 to 10 years, growth might settle into the 5 to 7% range, as volume growth is partly offset by pricing pressure and tenders in commoditized products. Through cycles, this block is relatively defensive. Hospitals need IV sets, needles, disinfectants, and monitors regardless of the economy. The main risks come from pricing pressure, driven by group purchasing organizations and tenders, and from sharp swings during events like pandemics. For investors, important points are the mix of commodity versus differentiated products, exposure to purchasing groups, supply chain resilience, regulatory and quality track record, and how well companies are adapting to care moving into the home and remote settings. So far, we've looked at what happens around the patient. Now let's step upstream into the labs and factories that create the medicines themselves, through the fourth building block, life science tools and bioprocessing systems. This block is the picks and shovels side of healthcare. It serves pharma and biotech companies, academic and government labs, contract development and manufacturing organizations, and food, environmental and industrial testing labs. Core products include lab instruments and analytics such as chromatography and mass spectrometry systems, sequencing platforms, spectrometry tools and precision balances, reagents and consumables such as antibodies, enzymes, assay kits, and lab plastics, bioprocess equipment such as single-use bioreactors, filtration systems and chromatography columns for biologics production, and software and informatics such as lab information systems, data analysis tools, and lab automation platforms. On U.S. markets, examples include Thermo Fisher Scientific with ticker TMO, Danaher with ticker DHR, Agilent Technologies with ticker A, Waters Corporation with ticker WAT, Bruker with ticker BRKR, Illumina with ticker ILMN, Repligen with ticker RGEN, Biotechne with ticker TECH, Mettler Toledo with ticker MTD in instruments and large systems, high-margin consumables like columns, filters, reagents, single-use bags and lab plastics, service and software. The global life science tools market is about $180+ billion in 2024 and is expected to surpass $470 billion by 2034, which implies roughly 10 to 11% annual growth. Single-use bioprocessing alone is projected to grow from around $39 billion in 2025 to more than $150 billion by 2034, a mid-teens growth rate. Regionally, life science tools generate around $180 to $200 billion globally today, with 35 to 40% of revenue in the US, about 25 to 30% in Europe, and around 30% in developing markets. Margins are attractive. Gross margins are often 55 to 65%, sometimes higher on reagents, and operating margins are often 20 to 30% for leading players. Cost of goods might be 35 to 40%, sales and marketing 25 to 30%, research and development 10 to 15%, and general and admin 5 to 10% of revenue. Growth for this block over the next 3 to 5 years is expected around 8 to 11% per year, fueled by growth in biologics and cell and gene therapies, expansion of bioprocessing capacity, and CDMOs, and increased R&D spending from both pharma and governments. Over 5 to 10 years, Growth could stay in the high single to low double-digit range if biologics remain dominant and new modalities like gene editing and mRNA platforms continue to scale. This block is more cyclical than core hospital supplies because it is exposed to biopharma funding cycles, especially for smaller biotech companies, and to government and academic research budgets. But once capacity is installed, recurring consumables and regulated bioprocessing needs add resilience. As an investor, you want to understand the mix of biotech versus more stable customers, the share of revenue from recurring consumables and services, technology leadership and installed base, the company's position in biologics manufacturing, and its discipline in acquisitions and integration. Next, let's look at a block that sits a bit closer to everyday life and aesthetics: eye, dental, and specialty care devices. This block includes ophthalmic devices such as cataract surgery systems, intraocular lenses, glaucoma stents, and diagnostic equipment. Vision care products such as contact lenses, specialty lenses, and dry eye treatments. And dental platforms such as implants, clear aligners, CAD/CAM systems, digital scanners, and dental imaging. Main products include eye surgery devices and implants, contact lenses and solutions, dental implants, orthodontic products like clear aligners, and the digital equipment that supports modern dentistry. On the U.S. exchanges, you can see companies like Alcon with ticker ALC, Cooper Companies with ticker COO, Bausch & Lomb with ticker BLCO, Sticker Surgical with ticker STAA, Glaukos with ticker GKOS, Align Technology with ticker ALGN, Dentsply Sirona with ticker XRAY, Invista Holdings with ticker NVST, and ZimV with ticker ZIMV. These companies earn from procedure-linked devices and implants in cataract surgery and glaucoma, from recurring consumables like contact lenses and dental supplies, and from capital equipment and software, such as CAD/CAM systems, scanners, and imaging tools. Ophthalmic devices overall are estimated as a $30 to $50+ billion market in 2024, expected to grow at roughly 4 to 7% per year into the early to mid-2030s. Cataract surgery devices specifically are around $7 to $9 billion in 2024, with growth around 5 to 6% annually. Dental devices and equipment are around $7 to $12 billion, with forecast growth of about 6 to 7% per year. Together, eye and dental devices probably make up a $50 to $70 billion global market today, with around 35 to 40% in the US and 25 to 30% in Europe. Economically, many companies here have gross margins of 60 to 70% and operating margins of 20 to 30%. They often spend 30 to 35% of revenue on cost of goods, 30 to 35% on sales and marketing and practice support, 6 to 10% on research and development, and 5 to 10% on general and admin. Over the next 3 to 5 years, growth is likely around 6 to 9% per year, driven by aging populations needing cataract surgery and implants, cosmetic and aesthetic demand for dental and vision corrections, and improving access in emerging markets. Over 5 to 10 years, growth can stay in the mid-single to high single-digit range if demographic trends continue and digital dentistry and premium lenses increase their penetration. This block is partly elective and partly essential. Cataract surgery and treatments for serious eye disease are medically necessary. Cosmetic dental work and some premium upgrades, like premium intraocular lenses and clear aligners, are more discretionary and sensitive to consumer confidence. Key things for investors to watch include the mix of reimbursed versus out-of-pocket procedures, brand strength with clinicians and patients, the pace of innovation in lenses, glaucoma devices, and digital dentistry, the strategy for capturing growth in emerging markets, and regulatory and pricing changes, including volume-based procurement and tender reforms in markets such as China. The last major piece of the puzzle is the plumbing of the system, the distribution and practice channels that move products from manufacturers to clinics, pharmacies, and homes. This block is all about logistics, contracts, and scale. It includes pharmaceutical and medical surgical wholesalers that move huge volumes of drugs and supplies from manufacturers to hospitals, pharmacies, and clinics. It includes retail pharmacies and pharmacy chains that dispense prescriptions and over-the-counter medicines and provide some clinical services. It includes practice-focused distributors that serve dental practices, physician offices, and clinics with devices, implants, and everyday supplies. And it includes home and alternate site providers such as home infusion companies and durable or home medical equipment suppliers. Main products and services here are the distribution of branded and generic drugs, vaccines and medical surgical supplies, practice supply catalogs, logistics and inventory management, and patient services such as home infusion, specialty pharmacy, and adherence programs. On U.S. markets, big players include McKesson with ticker MCK, Cardinal Health with ticker CAH, Cencora with ticker COR, CVS Health with ticker CVS, Walgreens Boots Alliance with ticker WBA, Owens & Minor with ticker OMI, Henry Schein with ticker HSIC, Patterson Companies with ticker PDCO, and Option Care Health with ticker OPCH. These companies make money through distribution margins on medicines and supplies, small spreads on very large volumes, through service fees for logistics, patient support, hub services, and data analytics to manufacturers, and through retail pharmacy margins on prescriptions and front store sales. The global pharmaceutical wholesale and distribution market is estimated at between $0.8 and $1.6 trillion in 2024, and is expected to reach around $2.4 trillion by 2030, a 6 to 9% annual growth rate. Healthcare distribution overall is roughly a $1.17 trillion market in 2024, projected to grow around 5 to 7% per year through 2032. The global pharmacy market, across retail and other channels, is around $1.3 to $1.35 trillion in 2024, and is expected to exceed $2 trillion by 2030, around 7% annual growth. The U.S. has an outsized share because it has more than $600 billion in pharma spending in 2024. Margins in this block are thin. Gross margins are often only 2 to 5%, and operating margins are around 1 to 3% for large wholesalers. Cost of goods is more than 90 to 95% of revenue. SG&A is usually 4 to 7% for logistics, staff, and IT, and operating profit is just 1 to 3%. This is truly a volume and efficiency game. Over the next 3 to 5 years, growth is likely around 5 to 7% per year, reflecting rising global pharmaceutical spending, growth in specialty drugs, and expansion of clinical services in pharmacies. Over 5 to 10 years, growth is expected to remain similar, around 5 to 7%, but with continuing margin pressure from payers and manufacturers, and potential disruption from new distribution or tech models. Through cycles, this block is highly defensive on volume. People still need medicines and supplies in recessions, but margins are fragile. Policy changes, reimbursement cuts, and drug pricing reforms can squeeze profitability. Heavy consolidation means a few big players dominate, which supports scale but also concentrates regulatory and litigation risk. For investors, key things to monitor are scale and market share, working capital and cash conversion efficiency, exposure to litigation and regulatory change, the shift to specialty and home-based care and vertical integration with insurers, pharmacy benefit managers, and providers. To finish, let's zoom back out and look at the sector-wide outlook, the big tailwinds and the main risks. Overall, the MedTech and equipment sector is expected to grow around 5 to 7% per year globally over the next 3 to 5 years, and around 5 to 8% over the next 5 to 10 years. Within that, life science tools and bioprocessing, surgical and interventional devices, especially robotics and structural heart, and hospital monitoring and remote care are likely to grow faster, often in the high single to low double-digit range. Diagnostic imaging and in vitro diagnostics and eye and dental devices are expected to see steady growth. Distribution and practice channels generally grow a bit faster than overall GDP but at low margins. There are 3 big structural tailwinds. First, aging populations and chronic disease. More people living longer with heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and joint problems means more diagnostic tests, more monitoring, and more procedures, which helps diagnostic, surgical, hospital equipment, and implant businesses. And it also boosts demand for biologics and cell and gene therapies, supporting life science tools and bioprocessing. Second, technological upgrades and digitalization. AI in imaging and diagnostics is improving detection and throughput. Robotic and minimally invasive surgery is broadening to more procedures. Remote monitoring and home-based care are driving growth in monitoring devices and drug delivery systems outside traditional hospitals. Automation and digital lab tools are supporting life science tools and bioprocessing, including AI-enabled R&D tools. Third, the build-out of healthcare infrastructure in emerging markets. Investments across Asia, Latin America, and Africa are increasing hospital beds, lab capacity, and imaging access, which benefits diagnostics and imaging, hospital equipment and monitoring, and distribution and pharmacy channels, and gradually lifts demand across all 6 building blocks. On the risk side, there are also 3 major structural headwinds. One is pricing pressure, tenders, and trade policy. Governments are more aggressive on procurement and pricing, including volume-based procurement in China, and EU moves to bar or restrict some Chinese firms from many medical device tenders. Trade tensions and tariffs on devices imported from China can hit margins at large equipment makers. These issues put pressure on surgical platforms, hospital supplies, diagnostics, and distribution players. A second headwind is regulation and product safety. Device safety rules, post-market surveillance, and cybersecurity requirements for connected devices are getting stricter. Recalls or quality issues, especially for implants and hospital equipment, can be very costly. A third is payer and policy shifts. Drug pricing reforms, changes in reimbursement for procedures and tests, and changes in pharmacy benefit structures can reshape economics. Distribution and pharmacy businesses, diagnostics, and procedure-heavy device makers are all sensitive to how payers decide what gets covered and at what rate. So as an investor, what are you really buying in this sector? You're buying a mix of recurring, high-margin razor and razor blade businesses that sell consumables, reagents, implants, and service contracts, volume-driven, low-margin distribution giants, and high-growth, high-innovation tools and platforms tied to life sciences and minimally invasive care. Across all 6 building blocks, the key questions to ask are the same. Does the company have sustainable pricing power, coming from technology, better outcomes, or brand? How much of its revenue is recurring versus one-off capital equipment sales? Is it on the right side of long-term structural trends like aging, biologics, digitalization, and emerging market growth? And how exposed is it to policy and tender risk, as opposed to markets where clinicians and patients drive choice? If you can answer those questions clearly for each company and map it back to the 6 building blocks we've just walked through, you'll be in a much stronger position to evaluate opportunities across healthcare, technology, and equipment before you pick individual stocks.